Inside the police station, everything was quiet. Only the buzzing sound of clippers filled the air. A girl sat still in a chair, her eyes filled with tears, but there was no fear on her face. Strands of her hair lay scattered on the floor. Across from her, Officer Bradley smirked, thinking he had won. But he had no idea what kind of mistake he had just made. This girl wasn't just anyone. The moment her father found out what had been done to her, it wouldn't just be one officer in trouble, everyone involved would feel the consequences. Forever before. We star the story, comment below where in the world you're watching from today, and if you enjoy stories like this, don't forge a subscriber so you never miss a new one. It was a cold evening in Chicago when 14-year-old Jasmine Carter walked home from school. She had her earbuds in, nodding along to the music, unaware of the trouble waiting for her just around the corner. Officer Bradley, a cop known for his arrogance and abuse of power, was on patrol. He saw Jasmine walking alone and smirked. He had a reputation for harassing people who, in his eyes, didn't belong in certain neighborhoods. "Hey, you! Stop right there!" he barked. Jasmine froze, pulling out her earbuds. "Is there a problem, officer?" she asked, her voice calm but nervous. Bradley walked up to her, towering over her small frame. "Yeah, there's a problem. You match the description of a suspect." Jasmine's heart pounded. "A suspect? I was just coming from school." "Don't talk back to me," Bradley snapped, grabbing her arm roughly. "You punks always have some excuse." Tears welled in Jasmine's eyes. "I didn't do anything." But Bradley didn't care. He forced her into his patrol car and drove her to the station. What happened next was something Jasmine never expected in her worst nightmares. When they arrived, instead of calling her parents or a lawyer, Bradley dragged her into a holding cell. Then, in front of other officers who either ignored or smirked at the scene, he pulled out a pair of clippers. "You think you're special with all that hair, huh?" he sneered. "Let's see how tough you feel when it's gone." Jasmine screamed, begged, but it didn't matter. The clippers buzzed, and in minutes, her beautiful curls lay scattered on the floor. Bradley laughed. "There! Now you don't look so proud anymore." Jasmine sat there, humiliated, furious, and shaking with rage. But what Bradley didn't know, what no one in that station knew, was that her father was not just anyone. And when he found out what had been done to his daughter, all hell was going to break loose. Jasmine sat in the cold cell, her head burning from the rough shave. She ran a shaky hand over her scalp, feeling the uneven patches where Bradley had been careless. Hot tears rolled down her cheeks, but deep inside, something stronger than sadness was growing. Anger. Meanwhile, across town, a black SUV sped through the streets, cutting through traffic like a knife. Inside sat a man whose very name struck fear into the hearts of those who dared cross him. Marcus Carter. Most people knew him as a successful businessman, a billionaire with connections everywhere, but those who truly knew him understood one thing. Marcus Carter wasn't just rich, he was powerful, and he had a past that even the toughest men in Chicago whispered about. When his phone rang, he answered it on the first ring. "Mr. Carter, it's about Jasmine," a shaky voice said. Marcus's grip tightened around the steering wheel. "What happened to my daughter?" The voice hesitated. "Sir, she was taken in by the police. Officer Bradley, he shaved her head." Silence filled the SUV. The air grew thick with tension. Then in a voice colder than death, Marcus said, "I'm on my way." In the police station, Bradley laughed as he tossed the clippers onto a table. "Let this be a lesson, little girl. Know your place." Jasmine didn't respond. She just sat there, staring at him with a look that sent a shiver down his spine. Outside, the sound of screeching tires echoed through the night. Marcus Carter had arrived, and Officer Bradley had no idea what kind of storm was about to hit him. The doors of the police station slammed open so hard they nearly flew off the hinges. Every officer in the room turned, startled by the sudden entrance. Marcus Carter walked in, dressed in a sleek black suit, his broad shoulders making him look even more intimidating. His cold, piercing eyes scanned the room like a predator looking for its prey. Behind him, 2 of his men followed, tall, built like linebackers and silent as death. The air grew heavy. Officers who had once laughed and joked around fell silent. Even the chief of police, a man who had been on the force for over 20 years, swallowed hard when he saw Marcus. Bradley, sitting comfortably at his desk, smirked. "And who the hell are you supposed to be?" Marcus didn't answer. He simply took a step forward, his polished shoes clicking against the floor. "Where? Is my daughter?" His voice wasn't loud, but it carried a weight that sent a chill through the room. Bradley scoffed. "Oh, you mean the little brat who thought she could mouth off? She's in the back, and guess what? She's got a fresh new haircut thanks to me." He leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms like he was proud of himself. Marcus's jaw tightened, his fists clenched at his sides, but he didn't explode, not yet. Instead, he turned to the chief. "Get her, now!" The chief hesitated. He knew Marcus wasn't a man to play games with. Without a word, he rushed to the holding cells. Moments later, Jasmine walked out, her steps slow, her face pale. The moment she saw her father, her lip quivered, but she held back her tears. Marcus took one look at his daughter, her shaved head, the pain in her eyes, and something inside him snapped. He turned back to Bradley. "You put your hands on my daughter." Bradley rolled his eyes. "Yeah, so what? She was acting like—" Crack! Before he could finish, Marcus's fist connected with Bradley's jaw so hard that the officer flew backward, crashing into his desk. The room erupted into chaos. "Sir, please!" One officer started, but Marcus raised a hand, silencing him. Bradley groaned, spitting blood onto the floor. "You just assaulted an officer!" Marcus grabbed him by the collar, yanking him up so their faces were inches apart. His voice was calm, but deadly. "You have no idea who you just messed with." Bradley's cocky attitude vanished. For the first time, fear flickered in his eyes. Marcus leaned in closer and whispered, "Your badge won't protect you from me." Jasmine watched, her heart pounding. For the first time that night, she felt safe. The police station was dead silent. Every officer stood frozen, watching the scene unfold. Bradley, once so full of arrogance, now trembled as Marcus held him by the collar, his feet barely touching the ground. Marcus's men stood by, their hands resting near their waistbands, ready but waiting for the command. The chief stepped forward, sweating. "Mr. Carter, please, we can handle this." Marcus slowly turned his head, his icy stare locking on to the chief. "Handle it?" His voice dripped with venom. "You stood by while your officer humiliated my daughter. You let this happen under your watch." The chief had no words. Marcus let go of Bradley, letting him drop like dead weight. The officer coughed, rubbing his jaw, but didn't dare speak. "You think this is over?" Marcus said, straightening his suit. "It's just beginning." He turned to Jasmine, his expression softening just a little. "Come, baby girl, we're leaving." Jasmine hesitated. "Dad?" She looked at Bradley, at the officers standing around. He can't just get away with this, can he?" Marcus smiled, but it wasn't a warm smile. It was the kind of smile that sent shivers down a man's spine. "Oh, sweetheart," he said, putting a protective arm around her shoulders. "Nobody messes with a Carter and walks away untouched." As they turned to leave, Bradley, still trying to keep a shred of his pride, sneered. "You think you can scare me? You're just another rich guy with an ego." Marcus stopped in the doorway. He didn't even turn around when he spoke. "No," he said. "I'm a man who destroys anyone who hurts my family." Then, without another word, he walked out, Jasmine by his side. But Marcus wasn't done. No, Officer Bradley had just made the biggest mistake of his life. And soon he was going to find out exactly what it meant to cross the wrong man. The ride home was quiet. Jasmine sat in the back of the black SUV, staring out the window, her fingers brushing over her freshly shaved head. She felt exposed, humiliated, but more than anything, she felt angry. Marcus sat beside her, his jaw clenched, his fingers tapping against his knee. His men, silent as always, drove through the city streets, heading toward the Carter estate. Finally, Jasmine spoke. "Dad, what are you going to do?" Marcus turned his head slightly, looking at his daughter. He could hear the pain in her voice, but he could also hear something else, determination. "I'm going to make sure Bradley never wears a badge again," he said, "and then I'm going to ruin him." Jasmine swallowed. She had seen her father handle problems before. He wasn't just a businessman, he was a strategist, a man who didn't just react. He calculated, planned, executed. "You don't have to do anything crazy," she murmured. I just want justice." Marcus nodded, reaching over to hold her hand. "Justice is exactly what I'm going to get." Meanwhile, back at the police station, Bradley sat in the locker room, pressing an ice pack against his swollen jaw. His hands were shaking. He was furious, embarrassed. "Who the hell does that guy think he is?" he muttered to himself. Another officer, Wilson, leaned against the lockers. "You really don't know, do you?" Bradley glared at him. "Know what?" Wilson sighed, shaking his head. "Marcus Carter isn't just some rich guy. He has connections everywhere. Business, politics, law enforcement. You don't mess with him." Bradley scoffed. "He's just a businessman." Wilson laughed dryly. "Right, keep thinking that." Bradley wasn't worried. He had his badge, his uniform, his position in the force. What could one man really do? But within the next 24 hours, his whole world was about to come crashing down, and he wouldn't even see it coming. The fall of Officer Bradley. The next morning, Bradley walked into the police station like nothing had happened. He still had a bruise on his jaw, but his confidence remained. As far as he was concerned, Marcus Carter was just another rich guy throwing a tantrum. But then things started to change. First, his supervisor called him into the office. "Bradley, we've received multiple complaints about you," the chief said, his tone unusually tense. "Effective immediately, you're suspended pending an internal investigation." Bradley's smirk faded. "What? Are you kidding me? Because of that little girl?" The chief didn't answer. He just shook his head. "Turn in your badge and gun." Bradley's hands clenched into fists, but he had no choice. He slammed his badge onto the desk, his face red with rage. But that was only the beginning. By the afternoon, news outlets were running the story. "Chicago officer under investigation for abusing teen suspect." Then his bank account froze. Calls he made to higher-ups in the department went unanswered. His landlord called, informing him that his lease had been unexpectedly terminated. Even his so-called friends in the force started avoiding him. Panic set in. That evening, as he packed up his apartment, his phone buzzed with an unknown number. Hesitantly, he answered. A deep, familiar voice spoke. "I told you, your badge wouldn't protect you." Bradley's throat went dry. He didn't need to ask who it was. Marcus Carter had destroyed him without lifting a single finger. Bradley tried to respond, but the line went dead. He sank onto the couch, running a hand over his face. Everything was gone. His job, his reputation, his future. And he knew this was just the beginning of his downfall. Meanwhile, at the Carter estate, Jasmine stood in front of the mirror, staring at her reflection. Her shaved head no longer made her feel weak. She felt powerful. Her father stepped behind her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "How do you feel?" She smiled, a small, confident smile. "Like I won?" Marcus nodded. "You did. Because in the end, the Carter family always won."